Hi there. This is my review for A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms, Episode 6, titled The Morrow, which is the Season 1 finale. I keep my episode analysis focused around a list of the 7 most notable points or topics about an episode. So let's dive in with point 1 of 7. The invented scene of Aegon considering killing his brother Aerion. This wasn't in the novella. If you haven't read it, it was invented by the TV series. It really wasn't controversial to me at all, because I actually took the time to look through all the interviews and behind-the-scenes videos to see what showrunner Ira Parker meant by it. And he directly explained it in the behind-the-scenes videos. Not the inside the episode that's tied to the same stream, but the A Night in the Making, they put out 3 of these A Night in the Making production videos. And that's almost 20 minutes long, but near the end of it, he addressed it pretty directly. And maybe that's why some people miss this, that he gave a pretty thorough explanation, and I went, oh, okay, I agree with that. But he says, direct quote, Egg clearly has a very dark side, that he has called for Aerion's death several times. That's true. There is a big difference, though, between feeling that sort of rage and actually carrying on with it. He's ultimately not that person. End quote. When I heard that, I was nodding along, going, yeah, that makes complete sense, that, as he points out, in both the novella and TV show, earlier in episode 3 during the joust, Egg was shouting to Aerion's opponent, kill him, kill him. That's in the text, they just extended on it. That Aerion has abused and terrorized him his whole life. And he's evil, and I can see how this added scene might have originated just from asking the open question in the writer's room. If Aerion is badly injured and incapacitated, he's abed and medicated, why doesn't Egg take this opportunity to kill him while he's asleep and incapacitated in order to rid the world of him from hurting other people? I can see how that comes up as a logical question of why not try to kill him in his sleep if he really is this bad? And as Parker spelled out word for word in his on-video response, yes, Egg would of course be tempted to do that. Who wouldn't in his position? But the entire point of the scene is that he ultimately could not bring himself to do it because he's a good person. That it's not like Maekar had to wrestle the knife away from him or something. That it's Maekar looks at him with a face full of love and sorrow and just rests a hand on him to implore him to stop, and Egg drops the knife and starts weeping. So I got that. It made complete sense. Yeah, it's getting used to, it's an invented scene, but I can totally see where this is coming from. This doesn't really contradict anything. It's a very well done scene in terms of just the acting and how I can see how it logically arose from that question. In hindsight, maybe that you could argue they shouldn't have put it in if enough people were confused by it, but I don't even think that many people were confused by it. That, okay, enough time has passed since the finale that on premiere night and the next day, I saw people yelling about this, but I realized those are just clickbaiters that were looking for attention. And you can tell because within a few days, by the next weekend, if people aren't talking about it anymore, then it's not a real controversy. That mind was blown. During House of the Dragon Season 2, there were problems, but Mira Reeds made this great video pointing out people were trying to stir controversies in every episode, and if you go back, there were many of these failed attempts at clickbaiting that fizzled out. Like claiming Rhaenyra teleports from Dragonstone to Storm's End, or Daemon teleported to Harrenhal. Like, no, the books have established that you can get from Dragonstone to Harrenhal in a single dragon flight. They have dragons. And there were other problems in the season, not getting into that, but the ones that you don't remember because they didn't stick, there was always a day or two after every episode premiere cycling through potential criticisms just to see what sticks. So it was weird how you saw people trying to act smart and, I'm just going to lash on to some criticism. And obviously so many days, at least in time, have passed since then that no one is thinking of this as a controversial scene. we got it. He gave an explanation. I think some videos are circulating out there that were instant reactions, didn't look up what the showrunner said. But it just highlights the wider problem of the clickbaiters are always trying to find controversy with everything, and none of the hardcore Song of Ice and Fire channels I've seen, even like Westeros.org, they got what that scene was trying to do. So, yes, he'd be tempted to, like Tyrion would be tempted, maybe I should kinslay Cersei or something. He can't do it. Or I get that why wouldn't he? Because Aerion is a monster. He killed his cat. He threatened to castrate him. All of this fits together for me. But being okay with this invented scene of, Egg was tempted to kill his brother, but ultimately couldn't, even though his brother is evil, and going, I don't even consider this a change, that directly leads into point 2 of 7, the post-credit scene, which, of course, then actually does rise to the level of a change in terms of character arcs, or at least potentially. That there is an invented post-credit scene, not in the novella, of Egg's father Maekar, as the Targaryens are getting ready to depart Ashford, loudly asking, "Where is my son Egg?" That doesn't happen in novella at all. That is seemingly a change, but my whole point here is I'm really not too worried about it, because of everything Parker said in post-episode interviews, and even his own behind-the-scenes videos. He actually devoted a significant amount of time in his own behind-the-scenes videos to openly saying, well, it was ambiguous in the book, but at the same time, you really need to address it without derailing next season. So I'm not too worried about that. He's not tried to act like, we kind of forgot about it. No, he's addressed it head-on so many times, so prominently. He's not going to get away with pretending it didn't happen, but at the same time going, I don't want to devote a lot of time to it. So they're going to wrap it up really quickly next season. And the other reason I'm not worried is, by this point, after this whole season, we've seen Ira Parker's sense of humor. And Parker likes doing fake-outs. Like the Ashford chair thing, that little invented speech of, for people who lie about this, we impale them on a chair, and then going, I'm BSing you, there's no such thing as an Ashford chair. Or the hero music playing and then Dunk having diarrhea, or thinking Sir Arlen died and then he just wakes up again. This is a guy who likes doing little fake-outs. So, debate that if you will, but I don't really get the sense they're inventing a major change. And Parker himself has said word for word, I am not going to do an alternate timeline where this diverges or even devote a lot of time to it. I'm not going to waste time reading off the whole thing, but up on screen here I'm putting the long block quote from his interview with Collider, where he stresses this show will not be an alternate timeline, but I'm not going to forget that happened. That they sort of just arose as a joke in the writer's room, that in the novella, Maekar leaves, and then Egg comes running up, because it's all from Dunk's perspective, and he thinks Maekar gave him permission, but you never actually see him doing it, and he said, it's ambiguous enough. They're just having a little joke. By this point, because we're not waiting 3 years for another season, Season 2 is coming soon enough, and we'll find out the after effects before it fades from memory. Well, how would they steer this back to the books relatively quickly next season? I can see 3 different options to do that. Either A, Maekar just comes around to thinking this really is what's best for Egg after seeing how well he's doing. B, it's possible Maekar will ultimately be grateful that Egg running off with Dunk saved his life. Minor spoilers here, but a massive plague strikes Westeros between the first and second novellas. And they explicitly state Dunk and Egg survived because they happened to be in Dorne at the time. And Dorne and the Vale, because they're mountainous, they were able to shut their mountain passes and close all their ports in time that they were able to successfully quarantine. So he goes, I survived because I was in Dorne at the time. Had Egg been in King's Landing, there's a good chance he would have died. They say 4 out of every 10 people in King's Landing died in the plague. Other members of the royal family die in the plague, including old King Daeron. So maybe Maekar will be grateful that inadvertently this was a blessing in disguise that saved Egg's life. and then seeing how well Egg is doing from a year of wandering around with Dunk, he'll go, you might as well keep doing it. Then C, the third and last option, which I didn't originate this, but I've seen other people suggest it. Maybe Maekar himself is acting in this scene. You know, putting on a fake show of not knowing where Egg is, even though he actually did give him permission. Why would he do that? Well, if you think about it, there's still Blackfyre spies everywhere, and he wouldn't want to announce, hi, my young Targaryen prince who's a member of the royal family and very valuable for ransom is wandering the back roads of Westeros with only a single hedge knight as protection. So I think there's a good chance that, plausibly, that maybe they won't do this. Maybe Maekar is just making a show of not announcing to the world Egg ran off with a hedge knight, but just he's disappeared, so Blackfyre spies won't hear about it. So either one of these things, either one of these three scenarios, I can see them wrapping up that little joke they made at the end of the season in one scene, just to quickly explain how Maekar came around to it. Because it is part of Maekar's character arc that he wanted what's best for Egg and realized it's best for Egg to go with Dunk. Now, I know that on Game of Thrones, people would build up elaborate lies and headcanon that, no, next season will have a twist that reveals this wasn't really a change but a fake-out. They never, not once, undid a change like that. One of my big complaints, one of the reasons I made my YouTube channel, was my disgust at fan site leaders at the time, for sites that don't exist anymore, who would insist, they would wave away any criticism of next season will address that. And then when it didn't, they would never own up to it. They would never follow up on, no, this Talissa change was not addressed in season 3 or 4. Littlefinger is not secretly alive after season 7, and that was a fake out. That never would they admit that there was always the promise of next season will retroactively explain this. Guys, I, more than most, criticize that way of thinking, but we've seen that Parker is a man who loves fake-outs, and he's prominently said enough, I'm not even going to devote that much time to next season, turning this into an alternate timeline where Maekar doesn't want him to be with him. I think it's just they're going to wrap it up as a joke in one, oh, it was a fake-out in one scene next season. Probably Maekar was acting. Or if not, he comes to see how good he's doing and it saved his life being in Dorne. I'm not really upset. Everything else went right. I'll judge it if it turns out bad next season. I'm just saying, I'm withholding judgment until season 2. If something really does go off the rails, I'll land on them like a ton of bricks, but I have no reason to think that at this moment in time. Plus, they can't really indefinitely have Egg on the run from the Targaryens, because in the third novella, without getting into it, they meet Bloodraven, they encounter a Targaryen army and go, oh, cousin, here's what's going on, because he's like his grunkle, basically. There's no way that they're actually treating this as a changed continuity. He's openly stated this isn't a separate timeline. I'm, of course, curious to see what will they ultimately do, but I'm curious about it. I'm not concerned about this whatsoever. And I think a lot of people yelling about it are just trying to stir the pot, you know, the clickbaiters and stuff. A little more than for the other changed scene, but this isn't really a controversy yet. It'll be a controversy if something comes up in season 2. I do not even think about this. I don't worry about it. Point 3 of 7. What did Lyonel Baratheon mean when he said, war is coming, to Duncan the Tall in the aftermath of the Trial of 7? Well, you have to start with out of universe. That we're asking, what did the screenwriters intend by it? Because this scene doesn't exist in the novella. And it's probable that out of universe, the writers just put it in as a little Easter egg to parallel how Lionel's descendant, Robert Baratheon, famously intones, "There's a war coming, Ned," in Game of Thrones Season 1, and then they put it in all the trailers for it very prominently. But could it still make sense in-universe? I actually think it does. What they've definitely shown is that Lyonel does not respect the Targaryens anymore. That a big point that showrunner Ira Parker has repeated is that without their dragons, the Targaryen hold over the great houses is a lot weaker than it used to be. But there's still a difference between not respecting them anymore and outright trying to overthrow them. I want to keep spoilers to a minimum, but many years after this, decades after this, Lyonel does actually start a brief but bloody rebellion of his own. But it was specifically due to being slighted when the Targaryens cancelled a promised marriage alliance to one of Lyonel's daughters. That up until that point, Lyonel was even eager to have his family marry into House Targaryen. His daughter probably isn't even born yet at this point in time. That up until then, he wanted her to marry a Targaryen. This is not someone who is actively planning to rebel against them. But what could make sense in universe, and I'm not sure if the writers really thought this through or not, but it does ultimately fit, is if we read it in the sense that Lyonel is painfully aware that the surviving supporters of Daemon Blackfyre are going to launch another rebellion at the first opportunity. That, remember, when we saw the long flashbacks to Dunk's youth, his friend Rafe even spelled it out for him. This is an orphan kid who can see the survivors of the losing side of the Blackfyre Rebellion are eventually going to seek revenge on a scale of years. That Daemon Blackfyre is dead, but his surviving sons and supporters fled across the sea to the free cities where, with their bonny king across the sea, they're constantly plotting new intrigues. That if you watch Outlander, the Blackfyres are sort of the Westeros version of the Jacobites. They're the Jacobites of Westeros, Blackfyres. And I can see how Lyonel in universe would observe, King Daeron is old and will die soon enough. Baelor's father. Baelor was a strong successor, he was a war hero, hand of the king, good administrator, but his own sons are young and untested. And Daeron's middle sons, Aerys and Rhaegal, who they mention in Season 1 in the second episode, those two are weaklings unfit for the throne. So yeah, it would be obvious to someone like Lyonel that with Baelor's death, there's blood in the water now, and the sharks will come. That Baelor's death left the Targaryens in a badly weakened state, and the Blackfyres will assuredly seize on this opportunity. So when Lyonel says, we can be a force, you and I, in this upcoming war, that doesn't necessarily indicate that, hey, I'm plotting to join the side overthrowing the Targaryens, Dunk, join me. You can read it as, there's a war coming, and we could do so well in it that I could rise to become Hand of the King. I can see how a loyalist would see a rebellion as an opportunity for rewards. I mean, even in House of the Dragon, the Hightowers and Velaryons aren't trying to overthrow the Targaryens. They're competing with each other to be the Targaryen second in command, and the power behind the throne. So I don't know if the writers intended this or not, but I can see how this is more than just fan service reference to the other show where there's a war coming, Ned, that Lyonel would logically be in a position to see the Blackfyres are going to try something now, and together we could rise to be very powerful, being heroes of another Blackfyre rebellion fighting for the Targaryens, not against them. Point 4 of 7. Green Apple Fossoways. Raymun officially split off from the main Fossoway family and his dishonorable cousin. In the novella, he explains this just before the actual fighting in the Trial of Seven, so we were worried there for a moment that they might cut it out, but now, after everything, I can fully see why they would put it after the fight, just for pacing reasons. This would have slowed it all down too much if they put it before. That in the novella, there's still maybe an hour between when he gets knighted, when Baelor shows up and says, I will be the 7th champion. Once they decide, yes, we are really doing this, we are going to have a trial of 7, we have the required number of guys, it still takes a little under an hour for them all to gear up, which I guess happens off-screen in the break between episodes or something, but for pacing, for the visuals of TV, I understand that. But the idea is that between when Baelor comes out and goes, we're really doing this, Raymun hastily runs off and repaints the heraldry on his shield, runs back, and explains it, that he says that the Fossoway heraldry is a red apple. I quickly repainted it into a green apple to distinguish me on the battlefield so you don't mistake me for my cousin Stefan because we have similar armor. That for TV pacing, it makes sense not to do that before the actual fight. That would have ruined it. I completely understand. I'm just happy we got it now. So, okay, it fits now. World building issue here is that what Raymun did is called creating a cadet branch of a noble house. An official younger branch. And Raymun might not be starting with much. It's smaller, but you're the head of it. So it's like striking out on your own to start your own small business. There are a couple of cadet branch houses in Westeros that are of note. I'm going to talk about that in a separate video, I guess. But, for example, the Karstarks are a younger branch of House Stark that split off a couple of centuries ago. House Lannister of Casterly Rock is the main branch. But there's a cadet branch that actually rules over Lannisport for them. That they think of them as, oh, they're this family of merchants. House Lannister of Lannisport are a cadet branch of the main family, and there's a couple of other ones. Well, officially, the main branch of the Fossoways are House Fossoway of Cider Hall. Cider Hall is the next castle over to the west from Ashford. Now, Raymun's new branch becomes House Fossoway of New Barrel. And you notice they put in that line where he says to Dunk, I'm going to try to start a new barreling outfit for their cider business. A new barreling outfit. The tower house or small castle his descendants build up is named New Barrel, capital N, capital B. And of course, this is straight from the book, that to distinguish them, the nicknames people come up are the Cider Hall main branch are the Red Apple Fossoways, and the New Barrel younger branch are the Green Apple Fossoways. And yes, they do survive through to the time of the War of the Five Kings. Game of Thrones just decided they weren't worth including even as heraldry in the background. On a quick note, though, we know from spy photos that House Fossoway will appear in House of the Dragon Season 3. Maybe not speaking characters, but in spy photos we saw their banners in the Hightower Army camp. But these are the Red Apple Fossoways only, that the Green Apple Fossoways, you saw their origin story in this TV show. This is 100 years before that. We have that to look forward to in Season 3. Everyone going, oh, it's the Fossoways. The main other thing they did with the Green Apple Fossoways, which I actually thought was pretty interesting, was the entirely invented character of Raymun's new wife, Rowan Fossoway, who up to this point was the prostitute called Red. She is an invented character. I wouldn't say she was canon all along. It's at the end of the novella, Raymun is still single. But because he has descendants, logically he must have had a wife at some later point in his life. But it's a blank page for them to fill in. So I don't really see a contradiction or need for controversy if, okay, sometimes you need to invent characters. That, okay, this is how his wife came about. And Ira Parker actually explained this in a post-episode interview, so let me directly quote that. It's also just hopeful to me, that the Green Apple Fossoways were founded with an up-jumped squire and a prostitute. Nobody's ever going to know after this, of course, that no one remembers she was a prostitute, but anyway, it seemed like fun, and when I pitched it to George, he laughed. So it was a positive sign. End quote. So that's really important. That means George R.R. Martin himself specifically approved of this invented character, which is great all around. And I like how this brings full circle how the story was drawing parallels between her and Dunk back in the first episode. When she compared that, prostitutes and hedge knights are the same because we both sell the services of our bodies, put our bodies at risk for coin. And just like Dunk, by the end of the story, she gets a more formal name extension. Remember when Egg asked, is Dunk short for Duncan? And he goes, yeah. In the text, in his inner monologue, he goes, for all I know it is, because he was an orphan. And he goes, it's like, what if you were named Bob? And someone went, is that short for Robert? And well, I'm an orphan, it might be. He doesn't remember how he was named. But he stuck with Duncan after that in his inner monologue in the text, he goes, Duncan the Tall sounds a lot more formal than Dunk from Flea Bottom. That this prostitute character, she was always called Red in dialogue. That's how she's credited in the cast list. She's still officially credited as Red. but now she's lengthening it to Rowan, to pass herself off as more formal, just as Dunk became Duncan. So I love that they kept the parallel going like that is great. As for why Rowan specifically, Rowan is actually a pretty common name for women in the Reach. That there was this legendary daughter of Garth Greenhand who was called Rowan Goldtree, and there's even a House Rowan that claims descent from her, so relatively common name. But if you're going to ask, is Rowan her quote-unquote real name? And Red was just a nickname, but it was always short for Rowan, or did she just decide to lengthen it to Rowan on the fly? Like, what did she know of as her original name? Who knows? I mean, was Dunk short for Duncan? It could be. So I'm so happy that Martin himself specifically signed off on this character. Point 5 of 7. Baelor Targaryen's son, Valarr, and Valar's wife, Kiera of Tyrosh. This entire TV season, we really only got this one dialogue scene with Valarr, which is, as in the novella, I mean, they didn't cut anything, he's just not that big of a character. But after watching it, it still feels a bit unfortunate, because in this one scene, the actor Oscar Morgan is pretty good, and it left me wishing we got more of him. So, don't expect to see him again. I wish him well. I hope this is a stepping stone in his career. He goes on to other bigger things after this. You never know. Maybe he'll come back in a Blackfire Rebellion show 10 years from now. He's pretty good. The only other thing of note for him in this is, because this is the only scene where the camera is really focusing on him as a speaking character, it's the only time they really prominently showed off that, as in the books, this is a book detail, he has a single streak of Targaryen silver-white hair on the right side of his head. He's been in a few episodes before this, but he wasn't the focus, and it was either, like at the tourney, he was wearing a helmet, or when it was just Aerion riding up to him, the camera, luck of the draw, happened to be pointed at the left side of his head. So book readers were asking me in the comments, oh, did they cut out the silver streak in his hair? It's just they haven't focused on him that much yet, so here it is. That consider that Baelor doesn't look Targaryen because he takes after his mother, who was a Martell. And Baelor's wife, the mother of his children, was also a Dornish woman. She didn't look Targaryen. So Valar's only 1/4 Targaryen, and he doesn't really look it, but genetics is weird in Westeros, that it's literally a quarter of him. Oh, he has this quarter streak of silver hair on the right side of his head is how they represent that they don't look as purebred anymore. But the rest of this section here, the real focus of this is quite a few people are asking about Valar's wife, who only showed up on screen this one time in the funeral scene standing next to him, his wife Kiera of Tyrosh. She doesn't have speaking lines, she isn't even officially credited. I mean, we know who the actress is because she was prominently posting about it on social media with behind-the-scenes photos. She was very nice about this. But enough people were asking about her physical appearance that I felt I should give an explanation here. Like, why is her hair pink? That just seemed kind of random. Well, it's because she's from Tyrosh. She is a foreigner from the Free Cities. And that's just something they do there. That's a world-building element about Tyrosh. Because Tyrosh is the center of the color dye industry in the Free Cities. And for most of the world, really. And you have to remember that in their medieval society, color dye is really expensive and hard to produce. Because they can only use natural sources. They don't have synthetic dyes that you synthesize in a lab with modern chemistry and stuff, that it is hard to get certain colors. I mean, infamously in ancient Rome, purple was the imperial color because it was the hardest to find color dye. And in a medieval world that doesn't have, like, TV or even photographs and newspapers, rich people tend to wear their wealth, that you display your wealth very ostentatiously. We might even consider it gaudy. So this happens in the Free Cities, also in Westeros. I mean, just looking at the tournament, you can tell a difference between the commoners who are wearing, drab browns and grays, and the nobles who are wearing really expensive bright color dyes on all of their fabrics and all their costuming and their clothing. And particularly in Tyrosh, because they're the ones making all of these expensive color dyes, they like to show it off, that the books state they're always wearing bright colors. They even dye their hair bright colors. And it states they dye their hair bright blue, bright green, bright pink. And when we actually saw Tyrosh for the first time, relatively recently in the House of the Dragon Season 2 finale, we actually see Tyrosh when Tyland is there hiring mercenaries. Even like mercenaries from Tyrosh will dye their hair bright blue. In the books, Daario Naharis, Daenerys' love interest of her time, his hair was dyed bright blue like that. That's an infamous look for the Tyroshi. But even among the rulers of Tyrosh, the ruling aristocratic classes, the rich merchants, the various magisters and things, a lot of them dye their hair these bright colors. Now, an interesting thing is we actually never got a physical description of any kind for Kiera. She's just in family trees. But what we think happened is that the TV show used fan wikis as a reference, used fan art as a reference. That there has been fan art in the past few years, predating the start of the show, which depicted Kiera as kind of mixed race looking and with bright pink dyed hair, and we think they copied it verbatim. That sometimes they just Google around looking for that. And that also ties into the big thing is the hair dye thing, but also in terms of race and ethnicity, more than a few people I saw in reactions and comment sections just assuming, oh, is she from House Velaryon? That the Velaryons didn't die out. Oh, okay. No, the Velaryons didn't die out, but she's not a Velaryon. The Velaryons are off on Driftmark. They don't really come into this story. That's a separate thing. But why does she look like that, then? Well, the wider point this touches on is that it is relatively common for people across the Narrow Sea and the Free Cities and the former Valyrian colonies, relatively common for them to look mixed race. And the books state that. They state that the lower-ranking Valyrians that went out to the provinces that were below the Dragon Lords weren't as obsessed with blood purity. Because they didn't need to we need to be pureblood so we can bond with the dragons more successfully. They didn't have that pressure, so they'd marry for wealth or love or whatever. And over time, they described them as, they're mongrels, is how the Targaryens looked down on them, that they intermarried with locals over the centuries. So people from the Free Cities can look like pretty much anything, particularly like Braavos is founded by escaped slaves. They're very mixed. Tyrosh is very mixed. Myr, they say they tend to look more Rhoynar, if anything. Few exceptions that they say, like Luck of the Draw, Lys and Volantis tend to look more Valyrian, but that's about it. But particularly Tyrosh, they look mixed race. They're a jumble of half a dozen other sources. I mean, the quote I have up on screen here. But I've said all this before in longer videos about the Velaryons, that the Velaryons are not an exception. Most of the former Valyrian colonies in the Free Cities, a lot of people look like that. And it's comparable to historical real-life empires. I mean, Valyria is Rome with dragons. Rome wasn't some sort of white nationalist utopia. If anything, it was a historical melting pot, uniting vast stretches of the world. The Mediterranean was a highway for travel under the Romans. So there's a difference between capital Romans in the city of Rome and Romans who moved out to the fringes in like the province of Egypt or the barbarian province in Britain or something, intermarrying with locals. The Targaryens are capital Valyrians, the Velaryons are colonial Valyrians. And as I've said before, this is also very comparable to colonial empires in the Americas under the Spanish or the Portuguese or the French. Latin America under Spain, they had this official racial caste system of you got the purebloods from Spain, European looking at the top, locals and slaves at the bottom. But there was an officially recognized class of mestizos, the mixed race people in the middle, who were just mid-ranking in society like that, who became just Hispanic people, biracial like that. And because I'm in America, I think more of like New Orleans, that New Orleans in particular was this cultural melting pot. And just as Sicily was a cultural melting pot for the Romans because the Mediterranean and Caribbean are these highways for trade along the sea lanes, mixing of people and merging of cultures, it leads to a creolization. Creole just means mixed, but this very creolized mixed culture as you would see it like colonial New Orleans or something. The point is, it's actually relatively common, not just not uncommon, but in fact common for powerful nobles and merchant princes and families in the Free Cities to look like Beyoncé. You know, New Orleans Creole. That's relatively... You'd expect that, the books say that. In this case, they didn't give any physical description for Kiera. I mean, the clickbaiters have to really yell about this, but it's like, they could have easily made Tycho Nestoris black, and particularly for Bravos, that doesn't matter, because it matches the source material. They say, well, they can look like anything. This guy just happens to look like this. So the Velaryons are far from the exception. Kiera is not a big recurring character. I don't think we'll see her again. She's not a Velaryon, though it's an example of a wider pattern the Velaryons belong to. 0.6 out of 7. Eggs invented dialogue insisting that there are 9 kingdoms within the realm ruled by the Iron Throne, not just 7 kingdoms. This line isn't in the books. The dialogue was invented for the TV show. This is something only some kind of hyper-books nerd would point out. And Ira Parker chose to prominently end a TV season finale highlighting it. Ira Parker is our new god. I'm not exaggerating. The nerdy book fandom, the wiki-writing crowd, such as myself, have loved pointing that out for over 20 years. You'd have to be some kind of crazy, lore, nerdy fanatic to put that in. Ira Parker had already earned our loyalty with a good season, but with this, he now has our fanatical devotion. Ira Parker, your grace, I am yours to command. But yes, there are 9 regions within the 7 kingdoms, administrative regions, because the Riverlands and Crownlands were never independent kingdoms in their own right. The name 7 kingdoms in universe, it said it was kind of arbitrary, that there just happened to be 7 independent kingdoms in Westeros at the time of the Targaryen conquest. Back thousands of years ago in ancient times, like during the Age of Heroes, every petty lordship now used to be a tiny kingdom or another. Like, the Umbers used to be a petty kingship over just where they rule over in the north now. Or the Blackwoods. They used to all be tiny kings. Even the Tarleys were petty kings at one point. But over the centuries, more powerful kingdoms gradually absorbed other ones, and they bubbled up and coalesced into bigger kingdoms, until finally there were just 7 big ones. South of the Wall, of course, there are no hereditary kingships beyond the Wall. But even the term 7 kingdoms wasn't some kind of official legal term. I mean, they were independent kingdoms. It was just a colloquialism. For many centuries before the Targaryen conquest, people just came to use the 7 kingdoms as a synonym for Westeros, the geographic region. And the name just happened to stick even after the Targaryens unified them. Well, at the time of the Targaryen conquest itself, the Riverlands were being brutally ruled over by the Iron Islands. They'd ruled over them for about a century. And the Iron Islands had in turn conquered them from the Stormlands, who had ruled the Riverlands for 3 centuries before that. And sometimes a petty kingship would rule some or even most of the Riverlands, but never for long. You can point to there's a few local dynasties, but they were always fighting rebellions, hardly ever ruled over all of what we now consider the Riverlands. So you could never really say it was a distinct kingdom. It was the borderlands. They were the borderlands that were swapped back and forth as their more powerful neighbors competed over them. So the Riverlands are sort of the Westeros version of like the Low Countries, like Netherlands and Belgium. The lands between France and Germany where they play out their contest between them. The Riverlands are sort of the unofficial 8th kingdom. And then the Crownlands are the unofficial 9th one, of a sort. That after the conquest, Aegon I carved out territory from other neighboring kingdoms around his new capital at King's Landing to make a new, separate 9th region to support it, directly ruled by the crown. This is feudalism, that you have the royal domain, where the king rules directly, So the Crown Lands are really only about 3 centuries old by the time of Game of Thrones, 2 centuries old by the time of the Duncan Egg stories in this. And they've only existed for a mere 130 years by the time of Rhaenyra in House of the Dragon. That they don't have much of a regional identity because they go, it's just this new administrative region we carved out. The Crown Lands are the capital region. The Riverlands are the borderlands. The Crown Lands are the capital. It's not really a kingdom in their own right. Compare it to how in the United States, if you were explaining this to like a Martian who came down or something, well, there's 50 states, but there's also a capital region that isn't part of any of the 50 states. What might throw some people is that the term the Crown Lands was never actually spoken aloud throughout all 8 seasons of Game of Thrones. I was filling in fan wikis and stuff. We checked. They never said Crown Lands in dialogue. The first time it was ever said aloud was actually in House of the Dragon Season 2, when they do mention it pretty prominently, when they're pointing at maps going, Criston Cole's army is on campaign in the Crown Lands. We're attacking the Rosbys and the Stokeworths. We're heading to Rook's Rest. So they mention the Crown Lands pretty prominently while pointing at a map that says the Crown Lands on it. So they finally did introduce it in TV, but even TV-only viewers who didn't know what the Crown Lands were really should know about the Riverlands. Because, I mean, to their credit, even Game of Thrones, the original series, for all its faults, back in their first season, they did prominently explain in live-action dialogue the Riverlands are the unofficial 8th Kingdom, that there's more than 7. Remember when Robert Baratheon had this invented joke about, I'm going to make the 8 by betting a whore in the Riverlands and all the other kingdoms? That, no, it's been since season 1. A TV-only viewer would know there's more than 7 kingdoms. That was even in there with the Riverlands. Well, whatever the case, the World of Ice and Fire sourcebook, which came out back in 2014, pointed out that it was always a misnomer even before the Targaryen conquest. That's Martin pointing out, names just arise from colloquialisms. They don't really need to reflect what's explicitly accurate. That the World Book points out no one ever counted the petty kingdom of Valyrian Islands in Blackwater Bay. That the Targaryens in exile ruled from Dragonstone. That they were on Dragonstone itself, and they ruled their vassals, the Velaryons on Driftmark and the Celtigars on Crab Island, a couple of other things. No one ever counted that, even though that's part of Westeros. And even before that, for many centuries, when it was 7 big kingdoms, the 7th so-called kingdom, Dorne, is officially the Principality of Dorne. It's not structured as a kingdom. That they're a principality, like independent Wales. It's based on their version of Wales. And the ongoing fighting with independent Dorne was like how the English kings were constantly struggling to conquer the Welsh princes, who were still independent. That 7 kingdoms just has a nice ring to it, instead of, 6 kingdoms and a principality. And it was a common saying even before the Targaryens. Of course, back during the House of the Dragons era, back then, Dorne was still independent. They mention that in Season 1. They're negotiating with independent Dorne. But when they list off formal titles for the Targaryen kings like Viserys, they do claim the title Kings of the First Men in the Andals and the Rhoynar, the ethnic group in Dorne. They still include the titles King of the Dornish and Lord of all 7 Kingdoms. Directly compare that to how medieval kings of England would, at times, claim titles like King of Wales, King of Ireland, or even King of France, even when they didn't functionally control them. It's a claimed title, we're not giving up on it, but come on. It doesn't reflect reality, but these things happened historically, so Martin put it in there. By the time of Night of the Seven Kingdoms, of course, Dorne has unified with the rest of the realm, and they'll explain that more in later seasons, that the marriage pact that brought Dorne under the Iron Throne was between Baelor's father and his mother, who was a Martell. So Egg has some Martell blood in him. They'll explain that within living memory, Dorne united with the other kingdoms. And this is kind of what the Blackfire Rebellion was about. All of the anti-unification people coalesced around the Blackfires. but just that giddy squee we all gave on the wiki crowd when someone is directly explaining and lecturing the audience, well, there's 9 regions in the 7 kingdoms. Ira Parker is now our god. Point 7 of 7. A true knight always finishes a story. This was a beautiful scene. It doesn't exist in the novella, though the details about Pennytree that he's talking about, those are from the books. Parker stated that Martin instructed him to leave it deliberately ambiguous whether Arlen knighted Dunk or not. So we're never going to get a revelation about that from a TV show. Martin might reveal it in a future book, he might not. Topic for a longer video, but there's also the possibility that Martin himself doesn't know or could have changed his mind at some point. We'll have to see, that's a wider issue. But I actually really love that line about finishing a story. That I've seen some interpreting that as criticizing Martin, which really surprised me. It never even occurred to me it was a criticism of Martin loved this season so much. I just wanted to say that this is purely my speculation, my read on it, but it felt to me like after this triumph of a season, it was Parker praising Martin, that Parker feels Martin is a true knight, who invented this entire story world, this fantasy universe, and that Parker has faith, because Martin is a true knight, that he will eventually finish his story, that he'll eventually finish his books. So I didn't take that as a criticism of Martin at all, but he's a true knight. He's not going anywhere. He'll do it. That's how I choose to see it until proven otherwise. That it really hit me emotionally, that line, and my faith in Martin and everything, just gotta believe. That I've talked about this before, how I went to the big launch panel at New York Comic Con back in October for the first teaser, that the 2 lead cast were there, the showrunner and George R. R. Martin himself. This was one of the biggest panels we've had in years, all in one place. And after over a year of this franchise feeling dead, at TV or books, there were problems from the writer's strike, there's gap years, and I think we'll get through all of that, but after the really rough year that was 2025, we've all agreed 2025 was a terrible year for this franchise, there was nothing. Over a year back through the summer of that. Suddenly, end of the year, October, being in a room full of over 3,000 cheering fans where there was nothing but happiness and goodwill and going, wow, there's all this new exclusive teaser trailer footage of how they're doing this. It's our first look at this new spin-off and these beloved characters and how faithful it was and just good TV in general. Despite everything bad that's happened, the good vibes of being there live and in person, you can see the videos of it. It's nothing compared to being there in the room and feeling Martin is a true knight and they're telling his story and it's as if all the bad things hadn't happened, and just enjoying it. Being there gave me faith in Martin more than I've had. It really boosted my faith that things will work out. I know that's hard to explain in words. Warm and fuzzy feelings, basically. A true knight finishes a story. So, I have faith in Martin. So, that wraps up what I have to say about this episode. I thought it was okay. It was an epilogue episode at the end of the season. I've liked it more the more I've rewatched it. I don't really think I can rank individual episodes of this season because it's all, one novella, one story. It doesn't really have the scale of the other shows where I'd rank episodes. I'm not going to do that. I will make a separate short season 1 review overall, very briefly, because I have no complaints. And as I've said before, you're going to go, this is doing right, things House of the Dragon did wrong. Well, you mean starting with having finished prose text to adapt as opposed to an outline? That's a silly argument of what they're doing right is we have these novellas to adapt that are finished. And part of me wonders if, how much more of that can we have? There's only so many finished Duncan Egg novellas. But for right now, let's just enjoy it as this is brilliant. This is what we needed. And I'm really surprised at how much TV-only viewers are loving this. That as other channels like Red Team Review and Preston Jacobs pointed out in their stream, a lot of us were worried. I said this is the first episode review. Officially, point 7 was, everyone is wondering if will a TV first audience even like this because it's so different. And it's been a bit of a slow burn because people are picking up on it gradually. But everyone who actually has watched it as a TV-only reaction channel, I've seen rave reviews from everyone. Just unapologetically, without reservation, praise that, as Carmine and Preston said, that this succeeded beyond our expectations. I, as a book fan, wasn't expecting a season this good, nor was I expecting the TV-only viewers to enjoy it as much as they did. So good news for once. It's a bit hard to react to that. Weird feeling not having bad things for once, but the real test will be coming up with House of the Dragon Season 3 later this year, and then we'll see what happens. But I'm going to make a dedicated review video to the season as a whole, and I was left really optimistic for once from this. And after the season review, I'm going to start doing news catch-up as we go into the next development cycle, so please remember to like and subscribe. I'm going to be revamping my entire channel. That obviously I didn't finish all the episodes as they were coming out for my reviews, because I realized this is such a slow burn. So many people are only picking up on it gradually. I knew a lot of people are going to be watching this over spring break in April. That's why I didn't rush to get everything done by the end of February. I've been treating this as the learning experience of figuring out behind the scenes. I'm redesigning my channel with better graphics, animation, algorithm stuff behind the scenes that I've been tinkering around with. This is the test case to figure out what I should be doing for House of the Dragon Season 3 and everything else onward as we go forward, because I knew in this one case it'll be a slow burn. I'm not going to do it this way for Duncan Egg Season 2. Season 2, I'm going to do topical videos and short 10-minute reviews. That's just the way this came out. So this has been the learning experience leading to a redesign of my channel. Thank you for putting up with it. And I'm really going to be turning a page with the style and format of how I'm doing things that I've learned from this.